I'm pursuing that original thread, which is, can I make a difference to the environment?
Mm-hmm.
And as I see that actually manifest, repeatedly now over decades, it's just more and more gratifying. And, my hope is that successfully commercializing this technology, the sync converter technology that we talked about earlier,
mm-hmm.
can sort of be the crowning achievement, if you will, and potentially, set up the biggest impact that I will have in my life on, making a positive difference for the environment.
Welcome to the Genius Podcast with Joe Pastor.
All right, I want to welcome everyone to another episode of the Inner Genius Podcast. And today I'm very excited to have on my guest. I've got Bill Golove. He is the CEO of Trianon Renewable Grid Stability out in California. Bill, I appreciate you taking the time to come on to be with us today.
Thanks very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Awesome. I'm excited. Well, I reached out to Bill. I got to say I was very impressed by his profile and some of the work that he has done. I figured, what a great guy to have on the show when it comes to talking about energy, power, renewable. Bill has seen it all. And I think he's going to give us a lot of good stuff to think about and to learn about today. Not only some of the stuff that he's doing, but he's got a fantastic story about how he got into this space that I think is priceless. So there's a lot of good stuff. Stay tuned through the whole show. Don't cut out early. You're going to miss some good stuff, I can promise. So, Bill, you talked, we had a chance to prepare for the show, talk a little bit. And, how did you get into this space? I mean, getting into energy, into power, into renewables. I mean, what really brought that about for you?
Yeah, that was a rather fortuitous series in my life. I was working in commercial property management in Los Angeles. I was part of a team that was managing two very large Class A office buildings in Century City, which is a more upscale part of Los Angeles. And we were approached by a guy who had just started a new company. And the basis of that company was that they would replace all of the major energy consuming systems in our buildings at no capital cost to us. And the way we would pay would be as a portion of the electricity savings only that would be generated by the replacement of the equipment.
Okay.
So this was largely possible, as the business model that he was presenting, because there had been quite a bit of advancement in the energy efficiency of these particular types of energy consuming systems over the previous 5 to 10 years. Mm-hmm. CFLs had just started to come in. There were a number of technologies that were up and coming that made this kind of business model possible. Mm-hmm. And Joe, as I had mentioned to you earlier, I have always had an environmental bent. I've been a backpacker from a young age and just valued the environment. And heard about this business model, and this was really the greatest thing since sliced bread for me, because it seemed like it potentially was different than the prevailing story that was being told at the time, which was that there was a clear trade-off between economic returns and environmental protection, that you would always sacrifice financial returns if you wanted to do something to benefit the environment. Right. And this business model that this gentleman was presenting seemed to me to suggest that there were actually win-win opportunities. And the truth is, I got so excited by the business model that I decided to go back to graduate school and attempt to study it and really see if this was viable. And if so, were there other business models that might also yield this kind of win-win environment economy as well? Mm-hmm. And so I think I mentioned to you that I applied to graduate business school, and one of the places I applied was UC Berkeley, which was my preferred destination. And mm-hmm. and they contacted me and they said, we love the idea. We'd love to have you. The problem that we have is that we don't really have any courses that fit what you would need.
Right, no curriculum.
They would said, so our offer to you is you take our core, mm-hmm. but you would supplement that with electives from around the campus if you can find them, and prove to us that there really is a substantial body of intellectual material here mm-hmm. for you to study.
Right.
So I started going through the catalog. At that time, catalogs were printed like phone books. And I started flipping through the catalog and came upon a very small, what they called group at UC Berkeley called the Energy and Resources Group. It had been founded very similarly to this kind of a concept, really to look at the intersection of science and business and the environment. And they had all kinds of classes which were interesting to me and which seemed to bear on the questions that I was interested in. So the long and the short of it is, I ended up going to business school. I finished my MBA, concentrating on business and the environment. And then I transferred into the Energy and Resources Group, where I then subsequently completed a Ph.D. At the time, I was unclear whether I really wanted an academic career, but there was something about having the opportunity to just study a subject at that level of depth, which was very interesting and compelling to me. And so I went to do that, and I was very fortunate. I ended up getting a full-time job at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab at the same time as I was pursuing my PhD. So now I really had an opportunity to get into kind of the professional dimensions of some of these questions, as well as the academic dimension that I had been studying. And that was really the beginning of my career in energy.
It's a fascinating story. And I'm so glad you shared that, with us today, because I know we talked a little bit about that previously. And, as I'd mentioned to you, it's interesting, we take these paths in our career, and you already kind of established a path. I mean, you're a professional and you're working and you're out doing your thing. And then this concept, this idea comes, and you mull it over and you're like, wow, is this even possible? As you obviously discovered that it is possible, you really pursue it, And I mean, I think that's part of the genius that I think you brought to your career, obviously. And what I love about on this podcast is that you saw an opportunity and you went for it. I mean, you saw something that was, a little bit ahead of its time, and you went really deep, and look at where it's sort of catapulted you today. And I think that's a great example for all of us, who start off on a path and then we go on another path thinking, well, maybe, I don't know, did we make the wrong decision in the beginning? Are we losing time? And it's easy to self-doubt, et cetera. But I just love how you had that foresight and that vision to see something and to sort of double down and go after it. And now clearly as an expert in this space, because of those decisions that you made. And that's kind of cool too, how you married up the academics with, Lawrence Berkeley, being able to do some of the application side of life. It's just fascinating. It's a good thing to keep in mind for everyone, all of us.
Well, you made a good point that it's something that I've actually thought about quite a bit and encountered a number of times. I've worked in certain situations, maybe with younger people or people sort of mulling career transitions. This idea that, what I've done before, if I change fields, does that become a waste? Did I waste those years advancing in that field? Now I may be starting at a lower rung in this other field. And the wonderful thing, one of the many wonderful things that I've discovered over the years is that, in fact, for me, it really was much more additive than it was a waste of time in any respect. So, for example, having worked managing commercial real estate, I really understood the mindset of the property owner and how they made decisions, how they allocated funds, how did they manage the property.
Okay.
And so when I started getting into this area of retrofitting existing commercial real estate, I had a much deeper understanding going in, even than some of my academic colleagues that were much more advanced than I was on the academic side. But I really understood this from a real world decision-making basis.
Okay.
And that informed, the work that I did and my ultimate ability to sort of progress and make it, and accomplish things in the field.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you sharing that. I mean, how you were able to sort of marry those two, and you come in with really that, I would say, indispensable level of knowledge, to pitch it in a way that points out the pain and the possibility, to the property owners. When you talk about retrofit, it's one thing to sort of talk about it certainly in a vacuum and what it can do, but how to have that conversation is a completely different story. So that's awesome. That's cool. One of the things I want to talk about too, talking about Trianon, I'm going to kind of give us a little background here. I want you to kind of jump off talking about what you're doing today. I think this is really fascinating. We touched on this briefly, and this is pretty powerful. So Trianon Renewable Grid Stability is working to commercialize a software add-on to conventional power inverters that transforms the associated inverter-based generation from asynchronous to synchronous from the perspective of the grid. Your product enables inverter-based generation to provide voltage and frequency support and inertia as well or better than large fossil generation technology. We believe this product has a potential to dramatically accelerate the adoption of wind and solar generation in the U.S. and even globally. So, I'd like you to kind of weigh in on that a little bit. I found that fascinating. You and I touched on it a bit, and it's kind of opened my eyes up to a few things.
Yeah, so I'll give you just a very brief sort of introduction to the field as a basis for explaining what we hope that our product will do. As I mentioned to you, we're at a very early stage, so we're still validating the technology, and I don't want to overstate the claims, but we're very hopeful, and everything we've seen so far continues to point us in a positive direction. So one of the things that you need to be aware of to understand this is that AC grids, alternating current grids, which is the bulk of the grid in the United States and most of the rest of the world, have an inherent instability. In order for the frequency and the voltage, two critical parameters for the functioning of things that are actually receiving electricity from the grid to function properly, is that those two parameters stay in a very narrow range. So we're a 60 hertz grid. That means 60 cycles per second. That's what hertz refers to. So it turns out that large fossil generators have an inherent characteristic of helping to contribute to keeping the AC grid stable. And if we want to later on in this conversation, we can get into more detail about exactly why they do that. But that's a very important characteristic of fossil generation that grid management, grid operators have relied on for essentially the last 100 years. So now we're in a situation where many people believe that as a result of, one, global warming, and two, as a result of declining costs associated with renewables, that we're in the sort of the early to early mid stages of a complete, essentially, reformation of the grid, where we will no longer be relying on fossil generation. We will be relying on renewable generation to supply the bulk of the electricity, around the country. Well, one of the challenges in making that transition is that renewable generation, which is mediated by something called a power inverter, to have that same grid stability benefit. An inverter, for those of you who are not familiar, is a device that converts current from DC, direct current, to AC, alternating current. So both wind and solar natively generate in DC. And in order to integrate them into the grid, to interconnect them, that power has to be converted to AC. So virtually all of the renewable generation and elsewhere are connected through these power inverters to create AC current. But as I say, they don't have this grid stability benefit. So one of the technical limiting factors to the even faster adoption of renewables has been this issue that, well, if we get rid of all of our big fossil plants, we're just asking for stability problems. And in fact, to some degree, we're already seeing that in areas where there are high penetrations of renewables.
Right.
Well, about 10 years ago, there was an academic paper published that worked out the math to say that an inverter could be reprogrammed so that it in fact could do these same kind of grid stability services that we've been getting from fossil
Uh-huh.
through this inverter-mediated generation, so through renewable generation.
Okay.
And he called this potential device a synchroinverter. So it's sort of a play on synchronous generation and inverter, in that whereas a typical device connected to the grid through an inverter appears asynchronous, meaning the frequency doesn't line up properly with the frequency of the grid, whereas a synchronous generator, like a large natural gas power plant, does synchronize the frequency with the grid.
Okay.
He worked out the math to say that, hey, we could redo inverters and they could now do the same thing. In fact, they can do it better because they actually are monitoring the grid very rapidly, and they can adjust the way they the way they input power into the grid to accomplish these services, as I said, faster, cheaper, and more precisely.
Right.
Well, it turns out that grid management is really, really complicated. And that initial paper, although it pointed in the right direction, didn't actually solve the problem completely. Okay. And so there were a series of subsequent papers that were published that identified some of the limitations of the earlier work, and we think have now solved, if not all, substantially all of the problems of relying on inverters to provide grid stability services. So there was a group in Israel that took the math that this professor had been working on and turned it into a computer program.
Okay.
Our company negotiated for the North American rights to commercialize this technology.
Okay.
And so we are now in the process of, initially validating that the math works and that the conversion of the math to code and then the implementation of that code in an inverter actually does what the original author of that series of papers thought that it would and intended that it would.
Okay.
That's the stage where our company is at right now.
Okay.
And if I may, I would like to mention, I'm sort of proud that our company just received what's called a CalSeed grant, which is a grant from the California Energy to aspiring entrepreneurs with new technology. And we're, in fact, next week, we're meeting with them for the first time since our grant was announced. So it's kind of an exciting time for our company.
Yo, congratulations. That's huge.
Thank you.
Yeah, where's that going to be? Where y'all's meeting? Is that in Sacramento kind of a thing? You get together?
Yeah, everything is all online these days.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, this is exciting. What does that do for you then? I mean, as far as you looking at the schedule of getting the product into the market, does that help accelerate the timetable here a little bit?
Absolutely, it does. We've been self-funding this company so far, and it's not a trivial endeavor to do the testing that's necessary to validate the technology in the way we believe that it would be necessary.
Right.
So the funds that will be provided by the grant will be invaluable in accelerating that process. Right. But I think equal, or maybe even more important, Joe, is that there's really an ecosystem in California of new energy entrepreneurs, many of whom are very successful, many of whom are extremely knowledgeable in very arcane and very specific subject areas. And as a part of the grant, they make a lot of introductions and those kinds of things available to us. So introducing us to this ecosystem and introducing the ecosystem to us, both sides of that, we believe will be very valuable as we advance this technology.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that, because it's not something we had talked about previously, and I almost feel like getting the money is one thing, but getting the money, it's sort of that validation. It's that we're real, you believe in us, you see the potential that we see, because it's easy sometimes to get behind your own stuff and to be that champion, and you have to be. It's tough out there, right? You got to continue to just grind it out and push it through, but whenever those third parties come in and say, you know, this looks really, really promising. I think it's nice to have the pat on the shoulder, but two, it's that sort of validation that we are real. And then there you go, the subsequent introductions. I mean, to me, it's exponential.
Yes.
You know, where you guys are going to be going from kind of here on out. So that's very exciting. Congratulations. Good stuff.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. Hey, just, you know, one of the things kind of getting on the personal side, you know, we like to mix it up, personal, professional here on this show. So take us through a day in your life. What's it like? What's it like to be you? How do you know, I mean, for everybody watching, thinking, okay, you know, you've done everything that you've done on the renewable side. You've got this great emerging technology. So what's his life really like day to day? So just, you know, kind of start to finish, what's it look like?
Well, that's a very interesting question. And I think I may give you an answer that's a little bit different than you might hear from most people.
Uh-huh.
For me, maintaining a work-life balance has been incredibly important.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, as I've advanced in my career and as I've attempted to achieve sort of bigger goals over time, I've had to work really hard to make sure that I have enough time to get exercise that I want, to express my spiritual life,
Sure.
to be a father. I'm a half-time single dad of a 9-year-old boy.
Okay.
I came to being a father a bit late, but he's keeping me young, and you know, I love being a dad. So,
Wonderful.
and I've got pets, and you know, I've just got a very rich life into which my professional activity fits. But candidly, it's not the driving factor all the time.
Okay.
So, you know, that's just a bit of color for sort of how my life is organized.
Sure.
So maybe I'll just, you know, talk a little bit about today. So I got up this morning, I had to get my son his breakfast, get him ready for his school today.
Yeah.
I had to feed the animals.
Yeah.
And then you know, in the middle of that, I'm getting emails and I'm reading emails. I've got several different projects that are going on the consulting side of my business, which we haven't talked about yet on right. in this discussion. But I'm advising an entity on a repowering of a wind farm in Texas. It's kind of a unique project. We're approaching the repowering a little bit differently than most of the other repowers have done so far.
Okay.
So I've been involved in a number of the sort of commercial elements of that, extending the site control, making sure that we have the right control of the property, making sure that we have all the permits we need. You know, and in fact, that's both site control and permits are things that I've been working on today.
Okay.
Then I have another activity which I've also been working on today. I'm helping to develop a very large solar plus storage project that's in its early stages. And so I'm trying to get my hands around exactly what the state of development is on that, right, and where the next steps should be and how to accomplish that. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, I always have to keep my finger on the pulse of this, what we call Trianon Grid, which is the Trianon Renewable Grid Stability company, and make sure that inquiries that we're receiving are replied to promptly. There is quite regularly new publications that are coming out on the topic, whether they're about the relevant regulation, meaning, you know, the regulatory environment in which these kinds of services are provided. There's all kinds of new technical papers that are coming out about how to manage grids with increasing penetrations of renewables. And I really have to be, you know, extremely current with all of that. So I'm scanning, you know, various kinds of news groups, and I subscribe to all different kinds of publications that are talking about, you know, both academic and professional publications. So my day can be highly varied. And then, you know, another day, which I suspect over the weekend, I'm going to be taking some latitude longitude data about a series of wind turbines and converting them into a format that will enable us to submit them to the FAA for approval of our locations for the wind turbines on the repowering project. And that'll be
Okay.
4, 6, 8 hours of just sort of grinding numbers and inputting stuff into various forms.
Right.
So, my professional life it really varies quite a bit day to day, but I love that. I thrive on that.
No, I appreciate you sharing that with us. I mean, I like the variability. I think that's, why guys like us do what we do. We like the variability, like the change. It's always new, different, interesting. It just keeps you on your toes. So, and I'm glad you brought that up, the kind of the consulting side of what you do as well on the, project development, especially the renewable type projects. But I can appreciate what you're saying. Sometimes it's code stuff. Sometimes you got to spend the time reading to stay up on what's going on, right? You can't fall too far behind. You've got to be prompt on responses. And I think what you gave was a great answer. I mean, for those that are thinking about being essentially entrepreneurs, and wanting to go out and do it on their own, you kind of got to get real comfortable with doing lots of different things at different times. There's not necessarily a lot of regularity. It's not a 9 to 5. But then again, I mean, that's not what we're looking for either. So, but I like how you temper it with the balance, for the exercise time with your son, being able to meet the needs, obviously there. So that's great. No, I appreciate you sharing. It was very candid. This is what it's like. And I think people need to hear that, it's what it is. So, I think sometimes, with social media, it's easy to get, wrapped up in those ideals, people painting these pictures of these kind of this dream state of what it's really like. But, when you pull back the veneer, it's a lot of hard work and, staying focused. So, one of the things I want to kind of transition to too is, what's one of the best piece of advice that you've ever received? And I like to ask that question. It could be something personal. It could be something professional. And one of the things too, I also want to slightly twist that question into, maybe one of the greatest lessons that you've learned, whether it's business or professionally, that you think has really helped shaped you in a really profound way. I mean, not unlike the, coming to understand the win-win with the renewables and the energy savings. And it really made an impact on you in a beautiful way. How about this with, it's a great piece of advice, big key learning for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I have a very clear memory of the sort of event where that occurred.
Okay.
It was during the time that I was working in commercial property management. And, I was working for a great company and I really enjoyed the people that I worked with. At the time, I was working at an office in Westwood, California, a very nice part of Los Angeles. So everything was going pretty well, in fact, very well, but I wasn't fully satisfied. There was something that was missing. And I had a mentor in my life at the time, and I got together with him for lunch, and I was telling him this. Mm-hmm. And he got quiet for a minute, and he said, Bill, here's what I want you to do. He said, I want you to go home, and I want you to get very quiet. Mm-hmm. He said, and I want you to listen inside. Mm-hmm. What is your insides telling you about what you would like to do for a career?
Okay.
I didn't even have to do it, Joe. I knew it instantly.
Really?
I said, I want to make a difference in the environment.
Wow.
I want my career to make a difference in the environment.
Okay.
And he said, beautiful. Hold on to that. And when you get tempted to go in directions that are not consistent with that,
right,
remember this moment, because that may be the single best guidance that you'll ever get as far as what you want to be doing. Wow. And you know what? I've held to that. I've held to that now. That was probably in 1989 or something to that effect. Okay. And then not long after that, this thing with the retrofitting the buildings came up, and it was like, wow, okay. This is what I said to myself I want to do. And the universe is saying, here it is. And so, you and I talked about like the courage to kind of follow these things.
Right.
And I hear you, but I really experience it as that courageous. Heard it as sort of following my inner truth. And, one of the things that I have just come to love about being in the renewable energy business, and I am not alone in this, is that so many people that are in it are mission driven. They're following their passion. I graduated from a top 10 business school with an MBA. I could have followed a traditional path and pursued, money, property, and prestige, if you will.
Sure.
But that isn't what drives me. And it isn't what drives a lot of people in the renewable energy business. Now, don't get me wrong. I want to be comfortable, and I've done very well.
Sure.
But I'm not pursuing wealth. I'm not pursuing that type of accomplishment in my career. I'm pursuing that original thread, which is, can I make a difference to the environment? And as I see that actually manifest, repeatedly now over decades, it's just more and more gratifying. And, my hope is that successfully commercializing this technology, the sync converter technology that we talked about earlier, can sort of be the crowning achievement, if you will, and potentially, set up the biggest impact that I will have in my life on, making a positive difference for the environment.
Yeah. Wow. That was solid. I mean, that's like gold, really. I mean, I tell you what, if you're watching this podcast and you're thinking of getting into this space and you're looking for a mentor, just rewind the last 4 minutes and listen to it again. I mean, you're staring at your guy right here. No, I appreciate you saying that. No, seriously. I mean, the mission-driven approach, I mean, that does tie into the passion. And I think that's what pushes you on the hard days. I mean, there's a lot of challenging days. There's a lot of, setbacks and, money. Yeah. I mean, we need the money, but money doesn't solve all those problems. I mean, it's because you could always have a little more would be better. So, but that being said, there's gotta be something bigger than that, for you to kind of keep getting up and pushing every day. And I liked, that was a great insight on your crowning achievement. It's the technology and the impact of the technology. It's not necessarily what the financial elements will be. I mean, I imagine they would be good, but that's not what's motivating you to do it every day. So, that was great. No,
Thank you very much.
But I like it. That was good. Well, and that's the other thing too. I mean, let's be honest. I mean, you were prepared. I do think, like we did talk about, courage to step out and do it. But, the one thing that you brought in, I mean, even taught me here today, is that you were clear, through the guidance of your mentor of what it was. And so it was just a matter of time till it kind of manifested itself. And then you reached out and grabbed it. And, that's a great example. I mean, if we spent more time being clear about what it was, then when it came, we could move to it naturally instead of, the angst that tends to go with indecision and uncertainty, just clouds the decision and makes it really tough to commit to. So that's awesome. Yeah. Wow, that's good. I appreciate that one. Where do you see the niche going? Renewables. I mean, you can kind of take it anywhere you want. You talked a little bit about your technology. You talked a little, we doing the consulting, looking at the state of the country, even looking globally. Where do you see the, renewables, essentially going? I like the fact you brought up the grid too. I mean, the grid is aging and grid needs some help. Over the next 5-10 years, someone, and I come at it from the perspective too, someone watching this that maybe doesn't know much about the energy space. Maybe they're just getting into the energy space and just, again, they don't know much from that perspective either. And they're wondering, what, if I do jump in and move in this direction, what is likely, 5-10 years out from now, what would be considered reasonable? So I'd love to get your perspective and take on that.
Yeah. So, I think that we're, at the relatively early, as I said, early to early mid sort of stage of the next industrial revolution.
Okay.
And a couple of dimensions of that are clean, meaning no longer using the environment as a waste bin, which has essentially been what we have done for the entire time of human civilization. We haven't really been concerned about what we were doing, how much waste we were producing, or what we were doing with it.
Right.
The atmosphere, we just dump waste, without really giving it a second thought. And up until not very long ago, that was fine. The earth and the environment is large enough that it was able to handle that, what they call insult, the various kinds of pollution. But in the last, let's say, people will argue maybe 20, maybe 50 years, between the growth in population around the world and the impact of increasing technology and increasing industrialization around the world, the environment can no longer stand the insult that we've been addressing to it, at least without pushing back in very significant ways. And I think we're seeing that. So what I think is happening, Joe, is that there's an imperative that's the result of what's been happening, our business as usual from the past, combined with an incredible amount of creativity that is being poured into not just energy, but really all fields, in terms of, okay, so if really being clean is important, how do we do that? So that's one major element. And then another major element is sort of smaller, and you're probably aware of that. I mean, we're all aware of that, that our cell phones, our smartphones can do more than a computer that filled a building, 50 or 70 years ago, right, just in our hand. So, the trend is clearly to smaller. And I think both of those two, clean and small, are really important trends in where energy is going. Okay. So I think that if you look 10 years from now, there will no longer be a question of whether we're in a transition, an energy transition, as people like to talk about. This will be a fait accompli. Okay. A fait accompli, yeah. All around the world, here and pretty much everywhere else. There are some obstacles, and clearly there are some economic interests which want to try to slow it down, but they're not going to be successful. Okay. There's absolutely too much momentum. There's too much imperative. There's too much creativity. There's too much passion that's put into this now. It cannot be stopped. So, in the lifetime of many of the people listening to this podcast, we will be in a renewable energy world where we rely on a lot of distributed generation. Okay. So there's going to be, a dramatic increase in the amount of solar adoption. I was thinking about it today, or maybe it was today or yesterday. I saw a post on LinkedIn about the price of solar. The first solar project that I developed, we got a $6 a watt subsidy from the local utility, which was Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. This was in 2003. We got a $6 a watt. Wow. The raw cost of that project today would be about 50 cents a watt. Wow. So a project that was entitled to a $6 a watt rebate 15, 17 years ago, today would cost about, 8% of what would have cost at that time. Wow. So the pace of change and the magnitude of the change, I just don't think there's really any that in the kind of timeframes you're asking about, that this is going to become mainstream, and we will reorganize in many important ways to encourage and support this transition.
Yeah. No, it's interesting how you use that example. I mean, I can remember, power projects that I was a part of, back 2010, 2011, 2012, specifically the solar field utility scale, California, and, how the price has just come down so far, price on the equipment, price on the panels, the PPAs themselves, how they're being negotiated, what's being offered. It's really, really, really dropped off. So, but I think to your point, that just shows the momentum that's being made. I mean, you don't get there without solid momentum and consistency. And this is kind of where we're going from here forward without that happening. So, I appreciate that. That's a good insight, I think, for all of us to kind of keep in mind. What do we're about out of time. This goes so fast. Gosh, we could easily do another hour here, or another half hour anyway. But one of the things I want to do kind of at the very end, just give you a chance, what's the best way to get in touch with you? You can please offer the websites for your company so people can reach out to the company or to you in particular. What is the best way to get in touch with you and the websites, please?
Yeah, the best way to get in touch with me is through LinkedIn.
Okay. And
I'm very to people reaching out to me that I haven't met yet.
Okay.
In fact, as I mentioned to you, one of the things that I get a lot of satisfaction from is mentoring.
Yeah.
So if there are people that are, at a decision point, either thinking about entering the field, or maybe they've entered and they're sort of looking for the next step, how do they get where they want to go? I'd be delighted to talk to people like that. So through LinkedIn is probably the easiest way.
Okay.
Our consulting company, it does have a website. It's Trianon Power, TRIAN Power, all one word, .com. And then our grid stability company also has a website, which is trianongrid.com.
Okay.
So people can certainly go there, and there's links there to contact me through those as well.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. And we'll go ahead and put in the comment section below the video for the YouTube. We'll have the links in there for you too. So in the description, you can just go down and click on the links and take you where you need to be. So I just want to thank you again, Bill, for making the time to come on the show today. It's fantastic having you. I've enjoyed the opportunity to get to know you, learn more about you. I think your insights have been spot on. There's a lot of inner genius going on in this one. So I appreciate you being with us today.
Thanks so much, Joe. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here.
You bet. Well, if you're watching this podcast and you wonder, how do I get into the hot seat where Bill is today? Just reach out to us, innergeniuspodcast.com. It's on the back wall behind me. And until next time, remember, there's a genius inside of all of us. It's up to you to discover it, harness it, and share it with the world. So the question really is this: what's your inner genius?
Get it. This is the Padua Podcast Network. PaduaPodcastNetwork.com.